But you know what happened? Is neighbors helped neighbors. And I often wonder would that happen today. And yeah, I want to say that maybe looters would help looters, but neighbors help neighbors. John Shaw helps Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Capon of Ocean Bluffs, and I put that on, but you can see the man helping them. All he has is a wheelbarrow full of clothes. It looks like a laundry basket, and that's his whole life. His whole life is right there in that wheelbarrow. And they stood and they fought side by side along Ocean Street. Firemen from multiple departments. They didn't have a viable, instantaneous radio network at that point. Walkie-talkies, they had phone lines. And for the departments to know what to do and to take instructions from Chief Wright is a testimony to the teamwork that took place during the Great Brant Rock Fire. There was a field where residents went to assess, stage, and regroup, and any hugs were exchanged when loved ones found loved ones. Does anybody know where this area was? Anybody? Father Bill? It's in Fieldston?
It might have been up in Thomas's Field, which was up around back of Winchips. Plymouth Avenue up in that area.
Okay.
Field that went up to a stone wall and became Marshfield Acres later.
Okay.
That's about the only place I can think of that there was a field.
Okay. Quote, it felt like some British seaport firebombed by the Luftwaffe. And again, that article about the Germans were beginning incendiary raids in Britain. Hey, they started it and they got it back. They got their comeuppance. But that was what this man said, that they thought they were being firebombed. 17 blocks, 2 square miles, 600 structures, 446 houses, some say 443 houses, gone. And go back, Chris, 1 second. Is that St. Anne's going up? No. Okay. Robert Bowles, Selectman Robert Bowles, another hero. We were licked in Holy City. Holy City was wiped out. And I want to say right here, and I think I have a slide, but money that's usually appropriated for burning off that marsh grass every year, $300 was set aside. Well, guess what happened in 1941? We're going to wipe out that line item off the budget for this year. We don't need it. And that was 3 days before the Great Brant Rock Fire. In Holy City, as I mentioned, small cottages bunched together near St. Anne's. They went up. Look at how close they are, okay? And they're we're not talking about these elaborate McMansions here that sit on the waterfront with large boats and docks. We're talking about poor folks that want to catch a summer breeze on a hot summer day, that's all. The fire station on Massasoit Street was spared. Combo 1, combination 1, everything burned except the firefighters. Providence. Now, you think about that, talk about Providence, that was their central area of command. And if that did go up, that would have set them into disarray, miscommunication. It would have been bedlam. But since Combo 1 was spared, still there today, this helped them knock down the fire. The irony at the height of the big fire is shown. John Troy, who is second from the left, is a member of the Rockland School Committee, and he's helping direct a hose line on the cottage of Miss Agnes Kelleher, chairman of the town school committee. So you got people from school committee from different towns helping out here. The winds, as I mentioned, urged the blaze on. The byline here, the liner note, burning furiously with only the whim of the wild wind, alliteration, to dictate its fury, the flames in this Brant Rock cottage of a typical example of the manner in which the fire spread from home to home in the area yesterday afternoon. See okay? Yep. The water pressure was terrible, despite the fact that the water tower held over 339,000 gallons of water. Marshfield police officer John Gawley saw smoke returning from Plymouth on a shopping trip with his wife. When he realized that it was his neighborhood that was on fire, he parked the car, they went inside, only having enough time to grab a change of clothes for themselves. As they got back out to their car, their house was engulfed in flames. He had to drive through a locked fence, to get out and escape. And then there's the famous famous photo was in the Boston Globe and Boston.com today and was in Going.com. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Bennett, they lost 9 houses. Now, these don't look like rich landlords. These look like broke people now. And Mrs. Bennett here, this is what they owned. Watching the fire, everything that they lost is gone. And of course, the major quote that was heard during the Brant Rock fire was, "I had no insurance." Mr. and Mrs. John Pratt, the newlyweds had just moved to Marshfield from Waltham only 3 days earlier before the fire lost everything. Fire hoses melted and caught fire. Over 70 year-round families had to be evacuated and relocated. And again, I go back to Selectman Bowles, Commissioner Garrity. Everybody chipped in with the Red Cross. Although I heard it was the story that I heard actually about the Red Cross that they were selling cups of coffee, whereas they were giving them out free to Right Starts. Helpless residents can only watch and pray. The folklore, and this is again, the folklore tells of the only injury recorded aside from singed eyebrows was an ash in the eye, but 13 Plymouth firefighters were treated on the scene for smoke inhalation. The sound was like the low growl of a hungry lion, is a quote. 30 cottages went up in the first 30 minutes. 300 went up in the next hour. It was the worst fire in New England since the Great Salem Fire of 1914 that took 2,000 structures. Taking coffee and donuts at Right Starts. Moments later, after this photo was taken for the people fighting the fire and residents of the area, moments later, Right Starts was gone. Structures burned and buckled and folded and collapsed within minutes. And of course, once a structure collapses, it sends sparks airborne, taken by the wind, to set off another structure. So the coastline then is ablaze. I'll be telling a story, I think, in a little while about a fisherman who sees this fire at sea. Now, let's just take a look at this one here. My friend over here picked out the other smoke plumes. What's going on up there? I mean, it looks like smoke, doesn't it? And this is after everything's pushed down. This is at the end of the fire. Everything's pushed down. The newly formed National Guard was called out. They were very busy in their initial deployment. I'm going to ask this in a second about a flying boat, if anybody remembers it then. Okay, there's a lot of folklore associated with this. Here it is. Okay, so I've been told that a Coast Guard flying boat circled overhead taking photographs. Does anybody that was there, raise your hand if you were there during that day of the fire? Okay, I've asked people if they recall a Coast Guard flying boat circling overhead, a clipper. And 2 of the residents said they do not. But, according, this is a, oh, that's a random photo of a flying boat. So the losses, can you go back, Chris? Losses of entire streets happened in 20-minute intervals from street to street to street. So the brilliance. She saved her husband's ashes, which were in an urn on the mantle, and her fire insurance had expired 2 days earlier. 2 thoughtful, and to this date unknown schoolgirls from Newton, and if you're here tonight, let me know, helped evacuate Mrs. Publicover and her valuable possessions. Is anybody from Newton here tonight? Okay. Smoke was seen from Nantucket, from Boston, and from Provincetown. Images of desperation and devastation, if we just take a look, we saw some of these earlier, but they're just a snapshot and a montage of different photographs. Some of the quality is poor indeed, but it just shows you the devastation and the raging fire. Okay. And then, the next day, a lot of people came from Abington. And at first I thought maybe Abington Village, but a lot of homeowners in Abington also owned a cottage property in Marshfield. And they came the next day, and they couldn't get into the area until the National Guard and the police allowed them to matriculate into the area. Losses were total. There was nearly nothing to salvage. Nothing to salvage. In fact, Biff Henderson, who's not here tonight, told me he was given, what, 25 cents for every chimney that he knocked down the next day on the foundations. Winship store had just been fully stocked for the summer before it burnt. And it was, okay, and it burned to the ground. It was difficult to find your own foundation, or should I say, your own cinder pile that used to be your house. As far as the eye can see, or as far as the lenses of the camera extended above, the ruins of destroyed cottages stretch out on the shoreline of Brant Rock. This photo showing only the chimneys and foundations which remain was taken in Ward Fieldston, and taken from a song by Roger Daltrey. After the fire still burns. The casino fireplace. Now, does anybody want to, I've been told that's the casino fireplace, but Father Bill, do you agree with that?
That's my family's fireplace.
That's his family's fireplace. It's not the casino fireplace. Father Bill, can you tell me about that house there?
Yeah, we were there. Actually, the property was Hewitt's Point. The cottage my father bought in 1936 was the Hewitt's Point cottage. You can see trees that are there. I identify it very well. The trees used to be in front of a Dr. Boutwell's house, which was 2 doors away from ourselves. He had a wall. You can see the wall. It's on the right-hand side. And you can see the bend of the land going around to Hummerock and Situate and up in there. You're looking down Ocean Street, all the way on the telephone poles.
Yes, we trust us what we say. Yeah. So, Father Bill, I will correct that. That is the O'Connor residence. A resident said Hitler couldn't have done worse. And again, as I mentioned before, it could have been, it looks like a village devastated by the Germans in World War II. War in all its fury, and again, war is on people's mind. The fire could spread no greater devastation over a resort than the leaping flames which leveled 500 cottages yesterday afternoon in the Fieldston Brant Rock section and left behind bleak ruins such as the bare trees and the tumbled chimney shown above. And then, yes, St. Anne's. The lead in the stained glass windows turned molten and the windows exploded outward. St. Anne's by the Sea Mass was held in the Fieldston Ballroom for 1941 and 42. Automobile tires melted onto the road. Now, do you remember Old Girl? The one from Duxbury that was fighting the fire? Well, the fire got Old Girl. And Marshfield Fire Department in the town of Marshfield replaced that for them. Within an hour after the fire began, New England Telephone and Telegraph, with help from Chief Pratt, had hung an emergency wire from the old schoolhouse converted police station. So that's when New England Telephone and Telegraph jumped into action and hung a line just for Police Chief Pratt. And the Brockton Gas and Plymouth Electric companies got out ahead of the fire as it was raging, shutting off gas and electricity and collecting copper wire, which is very valuable. Now, it took less than 3 minutes for the casino to burn to the ground. The Ocean Bluff house was razed in 5 minutes. Police warned about exploding projectiles and missiles being launched from the casino. They're talking about exploded bottles of beer. And of course, the wrath of the conflagration, the fire recodified zoning laws. Cottages could no longer be built on top of one another or with cheap, dry beech wood. Chief Silas Wright lost his home and his store with Charles Sterrett. And this is Inspector Byron Hall and Postmaster Charles Sterrett looking at the safe. It saves them many valuables. John A. Gaffey, a year-rounder, lost everything. Landlord Charles Lowell lost 19 cottages. They had to count chimneys in order to determine how many houses were burned, and kids were given 50 cents. I said 25 cents. 50 cents for each one that was knocked down. By that evening, every homeless family had been provided with shelter. Selectman Robert S. Bowles commanded the bivouac. And it ended just after 5 p.m. at the corner of Ocean and Samoset Street. Captain Everett B. Wood and the crew from the Plymouth Fire Department saved Brant Rock. And what I mean by save Brant Rock, not that the other guys didn't do a fantastic job, but he was the vanguard out ahead of it, and it was moving towards Brant Rock, and he told his men to stay, hold, and fight. This is what he said. His order at the corner of Ocean and Samoset was, we will hold our ground, and they did. Plymouth knocked it down. That's another fire department with a lot of grand heritage, by the way. Police Chief Everett B. Wood and his brave fire company knocked it down at dusk. So as the sun was setting at Samoset. Now, it ended just after 5 p.m., and the Boston Traveler, quote, and you know, they use a lot of poetic and flowery language, but it's beautiful. The orange-red flames blended with the orange-red of the western sky and setting sun. For minutes, the sun held sway. And my dad remembers going down with his grandfather the night of the fire and still seeing the glow. He was stopped, if you know where Assumption Church is today, where Canal cuts off at Careswell, I believe. That's where they were cordoned off. And if they wanted to walk in, which he did, they had to walk from that point in. And they walked, I think, a mile or a half, and they walked back to the car and said, we'll wait until they let us through. But you remember seeing that orange glow.
Sean.
Then, continue on, that's it. As it dipped below the horizon, the flames replaced its brilliance in